Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
In a moment, we are going to be talking about Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism problem and the, I suppose, counterbalance position to that, which I'm afraid doesn't really admit denial of the anti-Semitism problem. That's pretty much an established fact now, but does perhaps admit some suggestions that it is being magnified or over-egged, exaggerated, in order to smear the leader due to fears of his potential victories in looming elections. I don't think I subscribe to that second school of thought, but I will, as ever on the programme, provide a degree of oxygen for people who want to explore it. We're also going to look at the most compelling evidence yet that my theory about it being foreign money rather than foreign people that has made a mockery of the British housing market. Some amazing numbers coming in on that. And the north-south divide has, in some areas, never seemed wider. There's a horrible story about the likelihood of a child in the north of England attending university, a child from a deprived background in the north of England, as opposed to a child on free school meals in London and the southeast. And I need to tell you, and I'll give you a heads up on this, we'll do it at 11 or 12, I'm not sure which. All of my roots are in the north of England. Both sort of, my school was there, but you're not going to be able to claim to have a particular insight into the working class north by dint of having been at a very exclusive boarding school in the middle of North Yorkshire. But before that, Doncaster, mum's from Sheffield, dad's from Leeds. My first time was in Doncaster. The next door neighbour was a coal miner. I have that thing in my past, but I have rarely felt as if my bubble is thicker than when it came to reading this story. I absolutely entrenched in the southeast, and we sometimes forget on this programme how national we are now. Poor souls in Stockport have got my face flying past them on buses at the moment. So you're going to need to help me. I've done it in terms of solely material differences. We look at life expectancy, which goes down as you head further east on the London Underground. But this is national. I'm going to need a lot of help from people in the north who maybe have got a perspective on life in the south and can simply explain why children up there are being left behind by their southern counterparts. Because, you know, the education department, the same department is responsible for every corner of the country. You're looking at similar levels of aspiration, What are the differences? We'll find out in the course of this morning's programme. And I'm also drawn, you know how obsessed I am with shops, I'm also drawn to tales that House of Fraser now is trying to secure extra funds in order to keep the proverbial wolf from the door. That comes also on the day that, once again, we learn that restaurants are under threat. We will, as ever, find something to cheer you up. I'm leaning at the moment towards the tale of the scientists who've accidentally bred a city full of rogue mice. Look me in the eye and tell me that you're going to be able to go about your business today without finding out more about rogue mice on the run, possibly in a city near you. But let's begin with... I'm going to tell you some home truths. Not home truths. I'm going to tell you some sort of personal stuff about this job. But the biggest shock I had when I first started here, and I was trying to work out how many years I've been here the other day for a book that I'm writing, and it's quite chilling, actually. I still feel like I turned up yesterday. I still see Steve Allen waltzing through the corridors and feel like the new boy. But I've been here now for well over a decade, nearly a decade and a half. And the first massive shock I got was, I can't even, to my shame, remember which particular military campaign it was that Israel had undertaken, and which I described as being profoundly unfair and deeply unhumanitarian. And I'd never seen before the orchestrated cavalcade of criticism that came in. It made me wonder whether, long before we'd heard of Cambridge Analytica or Donald Trump and similar strange events, it made me wonder whether there was actually a sort of orchestrated movement designed to shut down criticism and dissent, not to question it or address it, but to shut it down. Because if you say, for example, I don't think that particular Israeli Prime Minister should have launched that particular bombing campaign on that particular corner of the Gaza Strip, it doesn't seem to me to be a comment that has any bearing whatsoever upon the religion of any of the people involved. The case I'm thinking of, I remember, because of course the thing you get accused of immediately when you do that is anti-Semitism, which for a lad who had never really encountered anti-Semitism before starting this job, it's an incredibly hurtful accusation. I mean, incredibly hurtful, because for me, it's by way of a little bit of background, I was very much educated in the Catholic Church, all the way up to the age of 18. And for me, anti-Semitism was essentially the Holocaust. You know, it was Nazism. So to say I don't think that particular Israeli Prime Minister should have launched this particular bombing campaign upon that particular corner of the Gaza Strip, and it's a particular tragedy that so many innocent people have been killed, how can that be anti-Semitic? But of course, when the accusation lands, I think it stops you doing it next time, actually. And if a thick-skinned gob on a stick like me can be cowed into questioning whether or not to say what you really think, then God knows what it would be like for people who don't get paid quite a lot of money to share their pungent opinions on the radio every morning. I think it worked. I don't have 20/20 hindsight, and I don't keep a diary. And I've changed my position, or I've come to a much deeper understanding of why supporters of the State of Israel sometimes move into the territory of brooking no criticism and brooking no dissent. I would say now that I get it, but my goodness me, there has been very few times in my career here when I've been more shocked by the vituperation of the personal attacks on me for simply saying that I don't think that particular bombing campaign should have been undertaken. Anti-Semitic, how can it be anti-Semitic? Okay, so we'll park that. Now, oddly, and no one's going to like this, something similar happens when you criticise Jeremy Corbyn. This is only really on social media. We'll see what happens on the phone lines. But if you criticise Jeremy Corbyn, you will be accused very, very quickly of being corrupt. You will be accused very, very quickly of being in the pay of a Zionist master plan to silence all dissent and take over the world. You will essentially be exposed to the sort of thinking displayed on this mural that Jeremy Corbyn has spent the whole weekend dealing with. And that's odd as well, because that suggests to me that the same people who really demand the right to criticise Israel are exactly the people who demand that there be no criticism of the dear leader Corbyn. So where does that leave the rest of us? Well, I think for the majority of people, it probably leaves them silent. Because if you stand up and say something relatively straightforward and coherent and sincere, and you get the most horrible of personal abuse thrown at you, I think you're less likely to stand up and say it next week. I really do. I believe that the way this country is run at the moment is horribly detrimental to the interests of ordinary people. I struggle with the fact that significant swathes of those ordinary people have voted to make their own lives worse by leaving the European Union, but I think the two events are linked. I actually think that the immense amounts of money and effort put into persuading ordinary people to act against their own interests do have their roots in a profoundly unfair distribution of wealth. I do think Jeremy Corbyn is right to offer up the hope and the belief that things could and should be profoundly different. But that doesn't make me a fan of him. And it doesn't mean that I have to doff cap, tug, forelock, vote Corbyn when he pokes his bearded head above the parapet. I'm entitled to find him ridiculous and even dangerous while agreeing that the way this country is currently run is profoundly at odds with anything that remotely resembles equality, equilibrium or fairness. It's absurd to suggest that if I don't rate Jeremy Corbyn at this point in time, I must somehow be a fan of Theresa May or Joseph Goebbels. In the same way, really, that criticising Theresa May in the hands of some conservative activists means that you must somehow be a fan of Hugo Chavez and Joseph Stalin. It's nuts. Luckily, there are a few corners of the British media left where you can pursue these conversations in a friendly and rational fashion. And this is one of them. The number you need to tell me what you think about Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism problem. The number you need is 0345 6060973. Okay? Here's what happened over the weekend. It was discovered, and this was first reported in 2015, so I am prepared to absolutely accept the claim that this is being deliberately recycled and deliberately reinflated in order to cause Jeremy Corbyn problems. But if he had withdrawn and apologised back in 2015 when this was first reported in, I think, the Jewish Chronicle, then the problems this weekend wouldn't have happened. So for me, that's a question of competence, not necessarily a question of bigotry. So there is a mural painted by an artist depicting clearly Jewish tropes, Jewish stereotypes, Jewish cliches, very rich Jewish men effectively running the world in the context, I think, of a sort of board game. And when it was posted on Facebook by the artist that he'd been told to take it down, Jeremy Corbyn posted a message of defence in which he would himself argue, and indeed did argue, that it was a general comment about the removal of public art on the grounds of freedom of speech. Now, the reason the fella had been told to take the mural down was because it is anti-Semitic. If you've got a problem with that statement, you're probably already lost to the rational discourse that I'm trying to have on this programme, okay? That's a shame, but have a great day. So, the reason that the artist was told to take the mural down was because the mural is anti-Semitic. Jeremy Corbyn subsequently claimed, and this is the point where I'm afraid the word cult will appear in my vocabulary, or I won't overuse it for fear of mispronouncing it and having a slip of the tongue that could leave us all feeling a little bit embarrassed. The defence Jeremy Corbyn has now offered up, while expressing his regret, is that he didn't realise that the mural the artist had been ordered to take down for being anti-Semitic was anti-Semitic. Let's have a little think about that. We're having a debate about anti-Semitism. I've joined the debate, but I didn't realise the debate was about anti-Semitism. Now, you're preparing to punch the numbers on your phone and ring in and defend Jeremy Corbyn. Just explain to me first, when you do, how you can contribute to a debate about anti-Semitism without realising that the debate was about anti-Semitism. Because that's what Jeremy Corbyn is asking his followers to believe. And I think if you do believe that, then you do deserve to be described as a cultist. I'm not going to say that word again. I always have memories of Nicky Campbell talking about the North Kent hunt on the radio and then promising that he wouldn't make the same mistake again that he did last time he said North Kent hunt on the radio, and then he made exactly the same mistake. I think Jeremy Hunt has led more prestigious broadcasters than me into similarly choppy waters, so we may not say the word cult again on the programme. Unless you really deserve it. It's 10:15. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Actually, should we go in on that? Can you contribute to a debate about anti-Semitism without actually realising that the debate is about anti-Semitism? Because that is what Comrade Corbyn is asking you to believe this morning, where we wade into the Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitism problem. If you're interested in my personal views, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. I don't think he looks at a Jewish person and feels differently towards them as he would towards a non-Jewish person. But I think his party is potentially riddled with people who do. And the conflation of Zionism with Semitism, or more pertinently anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, though relevant to this conversation, is increasingly in danger of looking like a bit of a cop-out. Oh, no, I'm not being anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist. Well, anti-Zionist means you kind of object to the existence of the State of Israel, usually. Let's explore. Reva is in Camden. Reva, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello there, James. Look, I've kept out of this debate for months, and I just couldn't resist trying to make a point today.
Good. Well, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I agree with you about Jeremy Corbyn not having quite got his head around this. It's very complex. He's only talking to one set of people. There are other groups of people he will talk to shortly, and the debate will move on. I want to tell you a short story about a march against Gaza. I'm a Jew. I'm an anti-Zionist.
What does that mean, Reva?
It means that I don't agree with Israel's current policies, and I don't agree with the occupied territories being under the aegis of Israel. I don't think I've got a solution to that at the moment, but, you know, I'm not saying...
That's why you and me are in the... That's why you and me feel excluded from political debate at the moment, because we've got views and we're confused, but we don't have solutions. And unless you've got a solution, which usually involves stone the other side, there's no room for you on the stage at this point in British history.
I can't manage stones at the moment. No, that's not me.
So when you say anti-Zionist, you mean you're profoundly opposed to essentially the policies of the Israeli government, most recently Likud, when it comes to the illegally occupied territories. And some people even object to that phrase, but that is the phrase that we employ under international law.
Yes, that is where I sit.
Okay.
I'm also a member of a Labour Party organisation called Jewish Voice for Labour, which does not represent the Zionist lobby. It represents Jews in Labour, and I am a supporter of Corbyn, but I don't think he's got his head round this yet. He will. What I want to tell you is about a march that my partner and I went on during, or several of them actually, during that last conflict, war on Gaza.
Yes.
We both walked through this march carrying banners called Jews for Justice for Palestinians.
Yes.
Now, I'm a member of this. My partner, who died exactly a year ago today, was actually born a Muslim.
Right.
But we're both non-believers and we're Corbyn supporters.
Yes.
The number of young Muslim people who came up to us during these marches, hugged me, shook his hand and said, "My God, we didn't realize that there were Jews who didn't support Israel and its policies in the Palestinian territories." We're so grateful to know this.
Well, that will be partly, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but just for the tape, as it were, that will be partly due to the unleavened diet of propaganda that they've been on the receiving end of, wouldn't it?
Well, indeed, and I think what I'd like to say to all of to you and all the listeners is that we who do this are actually making a case against anti-Semitism. We're trying to show that you can be a decent, upright, responsible, ethical Jew and not support oppressive policies. And once people realise that there are plenty of us around, not enough, but plenty of us around, they may not feel that to be a Jew is to, be a Zionist. And I think that is an important distinction, cliched though it is.
What sort of interactions do you have with what we will, for simplicity of purpose, call the Zionist lobby? How do they treat you, if indeed you've beeped on their radar at all?
Well, I think we are on their radar. They turn up at meetings. I was at one not long ago at the House of Lords, where they were there in force. And, they were kind of so anxious, so full of hate, so full of rage, that their body language was trembling and they kept shooting glances at each other to try and get a word in against a kind of reasoned debate. They are terrified of people like us. But, we aren't very effective. We're rather small in number. We're hoping to grow. But, I think they don't like us.
You've been very helpful to me. And it's a poignant anniversary for you today, Reva, so I'm particularly grateful.
I'm sorry to have spread it over 1 million people. I'm so sorry about that.
It's not quite over 1 million yet, but these are details. Are you going to do anything nice to mark it? Are you going to do anything special?
Not really, no. I think not.
Okay, well, you've spoken to me. So it's uphill now. The day can only get better. Reva, thank you very much indeed. It's 25 minutes after 10. Ali is in Islington. Ali, what would you like to say?
Hello. I was wanting to talk a little bit about the anti-Semitism and the fact that sometimes people, if they're not raised on anti-Semitic and racist language and stereotypes, I don't know what the stereotypes are. And so sometimes I wouldn't know what was anti-Semitic and what wasn't, but I would listen to my Jewish colleagues and comrades.
So you could look at a mural, for want of a better example, that featured men being depicted as very, very wealthy and powerful and possibly...
The mural you're talking about, I do remember it sort of from 10 years ago.
You wouldn't associate the facial hair and the hooked noses and similar as being Jewish stereotypes?
No, and not as a child.
Fair enough.
I didn't see that. I saw it as rich people trying to rule the world on the backs of everybody else.
Fair enough.
But obviously, Jewish colleagues and comrades have said, well, this is an attack on our community. The people they've got, that they look like us. It's designed to make you think it's us. And I didn't know that until you sort of go back to, until sort of like you remind yourself what the Nazi propaganda was in the 30s and how they demonised Jewish people and how these images and stereotypes have stuck with people. But I grew up in Hackney in London, and I wasn't raised on anti-Semitic language or stereotypes or racism. And so I find sometimes it's hard to spot because I don't know what I'm looking out for.
I think your call is brilliant, actually. I can't believe the first two calls today have been of such a sort of high calibre and level of interest, because I'll be honest with you, Ali, and this is probably a compliment to Beth and Ava who are answering the phones. I was expecting just to be sort of bombarded with the usual sort of how dare you abuse from every side of every coin, but you make a brilliant point. But it doesn't help Jeremy Corbyn, because he would not have your excuse, would he, as a prominent Middle Eastern commentator and campaigner. His claim, and I do find, hang on a minute, let me get this out in case I lose my bottle. I do find his claim ridiculous. That I've contributed to an online debate about a mural that's allegedly anti-Semitic, but I didn't realise that the debate was about the mural being allegedly anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I would have expected he had more advisors around him who would look into the nature of whatever the argument was about. You know, if it was about public art, that's, you know,
and then it got first reported 3 years ago. The problem is, clearly there are people searching around for anything they can find to hurt Corbyn. But when they find something that can hurt him, that doesn't mean it's not real. So that's where the smear argument comes in, saying they're doing anything they can to hurt him. I think that's true, but it's something that he actually did. So it's not, if you like, unfair to hold him to account for his own actions, his own behaviour.
He's also operating at a different level to everybody else as well. Well, we're trying to sort of like bumble around everyday life and not offend people, do the best we can by people, live by our principles. We try.
It is. So what do you think he should do now? I mean, because what you've got later today is the incredibly unedifying spectacle of a protest at Westminster being led by Jewish leaders demanding action. What action do you think would help to calm these waters?
I think his really sincere apology, probably not mudging the waters, saying
Still hasn't said sorry, though, has he? Not a personal apology for supporting the mural. There's a claim, I didn't realise what I was supporting, which, I mean, from a personal level, I think I'd be more embarrassed to have been busted for supporting something I didn't understand than I would be for supporting something I shouldn't have supported.
And that's the sort of, like, where I'm coming from. Like, when I was a student, that's the sort of mural I would say, yeah, that means that's about capitalism, that's about kind of global capitalism, and it's about world oppression. But you know, in hindsight, if I had, you know, if social media was around then, you know, I might be called to answer for supporting that mural as well.
Yes, but you as and that's. Do you know what? You make a really good point. I know I've already complimented you, so I won't do it again. But the idea that if you did something in your student years, as you've said yourself, I wasn't familiar with the tropes, I wasn't familiar with the stereotypes. I believe you, Ali. Other people are entitled not to. And then you went into politics, and 10 years down the line, they found that you were on one of these Facebook pages, offering tacit support, if you will, for something like this. It could end your career, and I would feel sorry for you in those circumstances. But not Jeremy Corbyn. It's 10:30. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. Very briefly, Richie's been in touch, and I don't think this is a snide question, because Richie is one of my regular correspondents, and as far as I know, he's a good egg. He says, I genuinely don't understand what a non-believing Jew is, James. Can someone explain? That's in reference to Reva, the first caller. I think the best way to explain it, and this is a bit of a sledgehammer, Richie, to crack your particular nut, is what Alf Dubs said to me the other day. Alf Dubs is, of course, Lord Dubs, the champion of refugees currently in this country. He was on LBC with Ian Dale a couple of weeks ago, and he doesn't believe, I don't think, in God at all. He's a humanist. But he still would have been sent to the gas chambers because of the circumstances of his birth, the Jewishness, in his case, of his father. It would have still been enough. So I think that probably answers your question. Do you ever consider that Corbyn's supporters aren't cultists, but have simply adopted a siege mentality from the constant and unfair mischaracterizations of themselves and their motives, asks Matt. And it's a popular question. I think the easy way of working out whether or not you deserve the tab or not is to ask you to share the top 5 problems you've got, your top 5 criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn, because I don't think there's a politician that's ever drawn breath on this earth that I couldn't give you 5 pertinent criticisms of off the top of my head. If you can't give me any pertinent criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn, then then no, Matt, I'm afraid I don't think the cultist label is necessarily unfair. I've got 3 phone lines free if you want to help me look at this anti-Semitism story. My enormous thanks to the first 2 callers, Reva and Ali, who have set a rather contemplative and intelligent tone for the conversation. If you want to be neither contemplative nor intelligent, however, you are still welcome to ring in and shout at me. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. He's got a problem. And the problem is with the people he hangs around with. It becomes a problem compounded by the old observation that you can judge a man by the company he keeps. And while I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn is himself anti-Semitic, I do believe that he is uncomfortably comfortable in the company of people who clearly are. And I don't know why, but someone just sent me a brilliant tweet. I got a little bit distracted by the... Here it is. It's from Julie. I'm fairly sure Corbyn isn't actually anti-Semitic. He is incompetent and lacks capacity to discern, which he makes worse because he only has 2 speeds, dither and pounce. It's a brilliant name for a law firm. Dither and pounce, both of which are informed by ideological romanticism and fueled by the recent need to equivocate and triangulate. It's true, actually. Dither and pounce. He either dithers, which is what he spent all weekend doing, or he pounces, which is what he does when he thinks he can smell the blood of his enemies. In the case of Owen Smith, for example, who has been sacked for suggesting that we should have a second referendum on Brexit. But remember, anybody who criticises Jeremy Corbyn is doing the work of the Conservative Party, even though the Conservative Party oppose a second referendum on Brexit, and people who oppose Brexit would rather like a second referendum, and Owen Smith spoke up for them, but he got fired. Oh, because of front bench collective cabinet responsibility, or because of dither and pounce syndrome. I'm nicking that, Julie. Seriously. It'll probably end up in my book. So, and if you're wondering why I keep mentioning my book, I'll tell you why. Hand on heart, the more I mention it to you, the harder it'll be for me to phone up the publishers as deadline day arrives and say, well, can I send the cheque back? If I keep mentioning it to you, for example, I should announce today that the Hay Literary Festival programme has just been released. I'm very proud to tell you that I will be giving the Christopher Hitchens Memorial Lecture at the most prestigious literary festival in the country, partly as a precursor to the publication of my book. Book. If I keep mentioning it, I've got to write it. I want to write it. I've got lots to say, but I suffer from a rare condition that I believe the doctors called laziness. Simon's in Hampstead. Simon, back to Corbyn. What would you like to say?
Good to talk to you, James. Just a quick piece of history on this mural business. Back in 2012, which is a long time ago,
yes.
Somebody called Yvonne Ridley, who is an Islamic convert,
former Sunday Express journalist.
Yeah, that's right. Well-known anti-Semite. You only have to Google.
I'm a little uncomfortable.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, mate, but you can't come on and say something that I can't demonstrate myself is true. So either you clear off or you withdraw that now.
All right, I'll withdraw the fact that she's anti-Semitic, but she's...
Now carry on.
Okay, right. So she says to Jeremy Corbyn, it's very moving and a wonderful piece of art. What's wrong with it? And he says, why? You're in good company. Rockefeller destroyed Diego Vieira's mural because it includes a picture of Lenin.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is
this is the Facebook exchange that the whole controversy is built upon.
So the point is,
I think everybody's seen it.
This was on the back of the fact that many people at that time were complaining about the fact that this was quite clearly...
Well, no, because you need to go back further. I think the artist posted saying, I've been told to take this down, and Yvonne Ridley replied to that, and Corbyn replied to her. So, I mean, the source, the root of the story
maybe I've missed some of the chain. But what's very instructive is actually that he didn't take the trouble to, as it were, consider them further. In other words, he was minded that this was somehow like taking down Diego Vieira's mural.
That's his defence. He didn't realise it was anti-Semitic. He thought it was like Diego Rivera's mural. And
the thing is, James, the most cursory glance at this piece of art would confirm what you said, which is that it has all the tropes of virulent anti-Semitism. You know,
I would let Ali. I agree with you. And Jeremy Corbyn clearly can't claim. I mean, having been immersed in Middle Eastern controversies and politics for all of his political career, there's no earthly way he could claim ignorance of that history. But I think Ali could. My earlier caller, I know quite a few.
Oh, definitely.
Good.
No, I've got a great deal. I thought she was really a super caller. Yes. But what's very interesting is Ali actually said, if I had seen this when I was a student, I may have reacted in a certain way, in the way that Corbyn did. And sometime later,
Yes.
I would have come to regret that. But what's interesting is this was when Corbyn had been a backbencher for decades. And I think this is the problem with Jeremy Corbyn, that he believes exactly the same things now as he did in 1976. He's not changed now.
It looks
Some
that
people
way.
say that's a
It looks that way. In his defence, I would, and this is a statistic that I think deserves a wider audience, albeit that I haven't fully dug down into it. But a lot of people are reporting that only 8% of MPs have voted to support legislation to oppose anti-Semitism. Corbyn has been on the right side of that vote on every single occasion. But there's a
that's very commendable.
Yes,
that's
it
very
is.
commendable.
It is
I think generally Jeremy Corbyn is. I agree. I don't think he's anti-Semitic, but I think he does have certain blind spots. And I think, for example, he won't condemn the regime in Cuba. Who locked up gay people.
I'm not.
He won't.
All right, you can have. Don't fill your boots, Simon. But I just want to confine the conversation to one controversy today. I'm good, but I'm not. I don't have a strong position on the realpolitik in Cuba at the tip of my fingers.
But I'm making the general point that there are certain things, and also what's very interesting, going back to the immediate past, in other words, the events of the last few days, in terms of the way this was responded to, the initial response, if you like, rather than coming from Jeremy Corbyn as such, was the spokesperson.
Yes.
You know who the spokesperson is, don't you?
No, go. What? Do you mean
Seamus Milne?
Well, again, you've done it again. I don't know, because you can be a spokesperson. There's half a dozen people in the office, all of whom we ring up and say, "Can we get a quote from the leader's office?" You don't know whose fingerprints are on. There's plenty to talk about here without labelling people anti-Semitic and without claiming
I'm not saying Seamus Milne is anti-Semitic.
No, but you said the other person was. Simon, you're exhausting my massive reservoirs of patience.
I mean, I think that it's a very sad situation. We've got the Jewish community moving on Parliament, demonstrating on Parliament.
Yeah. Do we need calls from people who attend Labour Party meetings and can actually put some flesh on the bones of what the real anti-Semitism looks like? Because, again, I think unless you are exposed to it or indeed immersed in it, it can be rather hard to credit. Not least because, as somebody who sort of sympathises with the Labour movement, both historically and internationally, they're supposed to be the enemies of discrimination, the most sworn enemies of bigotry and prejudice. That is why I think that the Zionism-Semitism conflation is so intrinsic to this entire debate, because what a traditional, quotes, lefty, end quotes, would argue is that, yes, we are always on the side of the oppressed. That's why we're against Israel in the context of the occupied territories and the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian people. But, I mean, that nature of criticism does, for me, fly in the face of what you would traditionally consider to be liberal left-wing positions. But that's just me. I could be wrong. I'm going to stay with this for as long as you want, because it appears, according to you at least, getting in touch with the programme, that this is the first truly fruitful, fertile and mannered conversation that you've managed to find on the issue. 10:45 is the time, the number you need if you want to join in, and there should be a phone line free just as soon as Simon moves along the rank, is 0345 6060973. What is the anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party? And I'll demand a degree of experience and knowledge from people who are poised to answer that one. No, nobody likes "I told you so" merchants, but I did tell you so. As Donald Trump's presidency of America continued, there would be details emerging which forced his supporters to ever more humiliating levels of hypocrisy and abasement. He knew it himself when he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and these people would still support him. I think that this weekend marked a new low, though. The pornographic performer Stormy Daniels, who was paid off by Donald Trump's lawyer in order to silence her story of a sexual encounter with the president, contained this quite astonishing. Remember, he still enjoys the support of the Christian right in America, the evangelicals. And this is Stormy Daniels' recollection of their encounter.
He's like, "Wow, you are special. You remind me of my daughter." You know, he's like, "You're smart, beautiful, and a woman to be reckoned with. I like you. I like you."
I guess, I mean, who wouldn't be reminded of their daughter when trying to seduce a porn star? Well done, everybody. Back to Jeremy Corbyn and his anti-Semitism problem. Ian is in Tel Aviv in Israel. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning to you. Firstly, and as you said, I'm speaking from Israel. I'm a Jew and I'm a Zionist. I listen to LBC, and I used to live in the UK. From my personal point of view, I'm extremely critical of Israeli policy. But where it sort of lurches into what we call anti-Semitism is when Israeli actions are compared to those of the Nazis, for example.
I can't quite hear what you're saying, Ian. I don't know if you can just get the mouthpiece a little bit further away from your mouth.
Sorry, can you hear better now?
That's a little better. I got as far as when it morphs into anti-Semitism is when
the comparisons with what the Nazis did to the Jews start cropping up, okay? So when people say Israel is bombing Gaza, and that's exactly what the Nazis did to the Jews, the alarm bells amongst Jews like myself start ringing. Or when in the same breath people say Israel is doing this, therefore Israel should not exist.
I can't, mate. This is terrible. We're going to try and improve the phone line because this is obviously quite contentious territory. I have to be 100% clear that I can understand what it is that you're saying. Let's see if South Croydon has a better phone line than Tel Aviv. Chloe's there. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Chloe.
I've always wanted to speak to you. I've spoken to Majid.
Dreams can come true. Now crack on with what it is you want to say.
I think this is part of the bigger picture of backdoor Zionism becoming part of the UK law. I think that the picture...
That doesn't sound mad at all.
I think that... but the thing is, I don't seem to hear much of this in the mainstream media.
Oh, Lord, the mainstream media. What do you think this is?
I'm hearing
You're on it now. Can you hear your own voice?
I can.
Well, then you're hearing it in the mainstream media. Now try again.
Okay, I'll try again. I think that the picture or the depiction, even if it does hint towards the notion that there may be some Zionists who are in positions of power throughout the...
No. You can't use the word Zionist because it's an ahistorical depiction of powerful, wealthy people clearly intended to portray Jewish stereotypes. It could be from both before and after the establishment of the current state of Israel. So the word Zionist has no place in it. It's anti-Semitic. It portrays Jewish people as oppressing and exploiting for money the workers of the world.
Okay, and you don't think that there are there's any reason to believe that there are certain columns of power in this world in which there are extremely powerful people who have
your position is
background.
Your position is it's not anti-Semitic because it's true.
Answer that. Do you think that that's true or not?
What's true, Chloe? Give me this killer zinger question that you've obviously spent all morning working on. Let's hear it. Go.
Answer me this question, then.
Answer me this question. Yes, Chloe.
Do you think that Jewish people are underrepresented in the echelons of power in this world?
I have never counted them, Chloe. Why have you?
I haven't counted them, but
how can you answer your own question? Then?
Okay, so if you think about it...
It would never occur to me to ask what someone's faith was as I was seeking to reach a judgment about their worth or their role upon earth.
This is the difficulty.
So you tell me then, Chloe. You tell me how are they disproportionately represented?
This is what you do when you don't agree with somebody. I don't
agree with anti-Semitism. You're absolutely right. And your argument, as I've understood it so far, is it can't be anti-Semitism because the Jews really do run the world.
You haven't understood anything I've said. Jews do not run the world.
Might not be my fault.
Most Jewish people... Do you know what? It's like I said to your researcher or the person...
Most Jewish people what, Chloe?
James, please, could I please just finish one point, if you would allow me, please? Please. I'm not going to say any... It's not racist and it's not anti-Semitic, okay? Nobody seems to have any problem saying that all Muslim people are not terrorists. However, lots of the people that we see terrorist activity from happen to be Muslim, but that doesn't reflect on everybody, okay? All Jewish people are not bad, controlling the world, wicked, evil people as they were depicted in Nazi propaganda. Of course they're not. That's ridiculous. But it does not ring true that just because that's the case, that there isn't any kind of Zionist collusion going on in this world, because it doesn't seem to indicate that. America spends $22 billion a year keeping Israel where it is. Why is that? Why is that? Why is it that they have now tied... Why have they now tied anti-Semitism... Why have they now tied criticism of the state of Israel to racism? Okay, criticising a country is not racist. Theresa May signed legislation last year that said that above and beyond criticism of Israel amounts to racism, and you will now be charged under... There were, maybe 50 journalists from The Independent, who signed an open letter to say that this is backdoor Zionism, the new legislation that embraced a new definition of anti-Semitism that was put forward by a Jewish group. Now, to blur the line between criticising Israel and criticising Jewish people... I don't
know what radio programme you've been listening to this morning, but we covered all of these points in the introduction in rather more depth and knowledge than you've managed to do there. No one is criticising Israel today. It's the criticism of this mural that has prompted the debate about anti-Semitism. I know what you think, Chloe. I know what you think. I think you should have taken your chances when I was talking over you and avoided coming out on air on the radio as essentially saying, no, it's not anti-Semitism, because some of these sort of shady, world-dominating people are actually Jews, James.
No, it's not because they're Jewish.
Okay, so why are we talking about it then?
Okay, can I ask you, do you
No,
think there's a
Jonathan's in Finchley. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
James, I despair at that call. I absolutely despair. I will be at the demonstration this afternoon. The fact is, the Jewish community, enough is enough. We've simply had it over the top with Mr. Corbyn.
Describe it to me, Jonathan, because, look, the mural's disgusting. His response to it is pathetic. I can't prove that he's either lying when he says, I didn't realise that this debate about anti-Semitism was about anti-Semitism. I can't prove that he's more comfortable with it than he should be. That's the suspicion. But when you say enough is enough, what are you pointing at? Because it can't just be the fears and the suspicions about Mr. Corbyn. It has to be the evidence of what he is, I'm going to keep using this phrase, uncomfortably comfortable with.
Jeremy, sorry.
Jeremy, steady on, mate.
James, we're up against the news, but let me run through it quickly. He said that Hamas and Hezbollah are terrorist organisations, are dedicated to the good of the Palestinian people. He hosted Hezbollah supporters in the House of Commons.
This is the greatest hits of criticism, and I'm looking for the very specific examples of his supporters. And in the context particularly of this mural, the stuff that is actually anti-Semitism, because expressing support for Hamas and Hezbollah, although it is for a lot of people offensive, it's not anti-Semitic.
James, I work with a group called Labour Against Anti-Semitism. We have reported over 6,000 members of the Labour Party.
And you're going to be able to tell me very, very easily what the most egregious examples of anti-Semitism are, as in looking at somebody who is Jewish and judging them as inferior to others.
Comparing what Israel does with the action of Nazis is intensely...
No, anti-Semitism means I look at you as a Jew and I feel negatively towards you. I want evidence of that.
James, there is a definition of anti-Semitism which the Labour Party accepts, which the government accepts, which 135 local authorities...
Go on, what is it?
Well, for example...
No, not for example. You just said there's a definition accepted by hundreds of people. Read it to me now. Tell me what it is.
Accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Accusing Jewish
who's done that then? When did Jeremy Corbyn do that?
You interrupted me. You asked me to read it. I'm reading.
Everyone's the same. Here we go.
Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or the alleged priorities of Jews and to interests of their own nation. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. Applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism to characterise Israel or Israelis. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the State of Israel. That is the definition,
Brilliant.
James.
And examples of Jeremy Corbyn doing any of that?
Jeremy Corbyn is a patron of Palestine Solidarity.
No. Examples
campaign.
of him specifically doing any of the catalogue of offences you've just read out.
He supported Stephen Sizer, who said that Israel was behind 9/11.
No. Jeremy Corbyn does not believe that Israel was behind 9/11. So give me an example according to your own very detailed list.
No, he supported Stephen Sizer, who said that Israel
I don't know who
was
Stephen Sizer is, but if you want to say live on the radio that Jeremy Corbyn believes that Israel was behind the September the 11th terror attacks, I'll chip in for your legal fees.
Misrepresenting me. I never said that.
So give me an example of Jeremy Corbyn doing any of the anti-Semitic things that you just read out.
He supported Paul Eisen, who's a constituent.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. I don't know who Paul Eisen is. I want a Jeremy Corbyn on the record doing any of the things you've just stated as the definition of anti-Semitism.
Paul Eisen is a self-confessed Holocaust denier.
So you think Jeremy Corbyn denies the Holocaust?
I never said that.
Right, so Jeremy Corbyn supports people that deny the Holocaust, and he supports people that think that September the 11th was a Jewish conspiracy, but he doesn't actually believe any of those things, Jonathan. Just to be clear, I've understood you correctly.
He swims in a sea of anti-Semitism.
So give me an example of the anti-Semitism. I'm very sorry, James, I can't, but I'm too embarrassed to say so. And we continue, I think, for a little longer, our quest to pinpoint precisely what the problems are and perhaps are not with regard to Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism issues. He clearly has them. Let's be clear about this. Labour is an anti-racist party. This is his own statement, version 3.0, I believe, since this story started gaining momentum. If you pardon the pun. Labour is an anti-racist party, and I utterly condemn anti-Semitism, which is why, as leader of the Labour Party, I want to be clear that I will not tolerate any form of anti-Semitism that exists in and around our movement. We must stamp this out from our party and movement. Here's the thing. We recognise that anti-Semitism has occurred in pockets within the Labour Party, causing pain and hurt to our Jewish community in the Labour Party and the rest of the country. I am sincerely sorry for the pain which has been caused. I, for the record, have sympathy with people who are asking, why are we talking about this? We should be talking about... Well, you can't use Brexit, actually, can you? Because Corbyn's probably even weaker on that than the Prime Minister is at the moment. But we should be talking about other issues, social care funding, perhaps, or Cambridge Analytica, or the fact that Vote Leave stands accused by a former staffer of potential criminality in the context of money. But we're talking about this. And I'll tell you, as a Liberal, why this is really, really important. Because historically, the Labour Party is supposed to be the home for those of us who support the oppressed, for those of us who seek to bring a degree of equilibrium and equality to the world. Equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, for pedants out there. And if the Labour Party is actually a harbour for people who speak about Jewish people in the way that the Labour Party tells everybody else they're not allowed to speak about people from a different background, it leaves them open to the accusation of hypocrisy. And if the accusation of hypocrisy gets some mileage or traction, then all of the good work that politicians seek to do in battling misogyny, in battling homophobia, in battling Islamophobia, for want of a better word, in battling any form of prejudice, bigotry and hatred, racism, this is an Achilles heel. It's an Achilles heel that, as indeed was the case with Achilles, could prove to be fatal. So if you believe in an anti-prejudiced platform, you can't have free passes on any prejudices. And unfortunately, as Jeremy Corbyn himself concedes, there are pockets within the Labour Party that harbour and foment this particular prejudice. We've heard it on the programme this morning. And I'll give you a really good example, actually, of where there's not a test as such, but the comedian David Schneider, who is himself Jewish, put together a really clever little test for anti-Semitism, which I'm afraid to tell you that at least one of my callers today has failed already, and they won't have realised why they failed. Here it is, basic test. Do you accept that millions of Jews perished in the Holocaust? Poor old Jonathan in Finchley a moment ago, essentially trying to hint that Jeremy Corbyn might be a Holocaust denier by saying that he supports someone who is, and then backtracking rather, I thought, in a rather ugly fashion when it was pointed out that either he's claiming that Jeremy Corbyn is a Holocaust denier or Jeremy Corbyn isn't a Holocaust denier. Similarly with September the 11th. Jeremy Corbyn supports someone who thinks it's a conspiracy, a Jewish conspiracy. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn believes September the 11th was under... I didn't say that. Well, then why mention September the 11th in the context of a question about whether Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic or not? It's really unattractive, that, Jonathan. I expect better from you. And here is the test. Question 1. Do you accept that millions of Jews perished in the Holocaust? Yes. See? Easy. Do you think that Jews exercise undue influence on organisations, the government, the media, finance, or your life? That's Chloe. The answer to that, Chloe, is no. Do you treat anti-Semitism in exactly the same way as hatred and prejudice against any other group? Here's the thing, here's the clincher, here's the problem for the Labour Party, condemning it outright without any qualifying comment about, for instance, the suffering of other groups. Yes, I do. Personally now treat anti-Semitism in exactly the same way as hatred and prejudice against any other group. And I can do so while roundly condemning some of the foreign policy decisions of the Israeli government or the Likud party in particular. It's easy. Trust me, I do it. And finally, did you manage to answer 1 to 3 without moving the subject onto Israel/Palestine? I'm not sure I did, actually. But obviously I knew what question 4 was, so I did that on purpose. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Marlon is in Manchester. Marlon, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I'd like to say, just in response to what Jonathan said, which I didn't hear, but I've just heard your sum up of it.
Well, hang on a minute. What have you been... No offence, my friend, but you can only comment on stuff you've heard.
Oh, yeah.
So what have you rung... I don't understand how you've rung a phone-in show without having heard any of it.
I've heard a little bit, but I turned it on about 10 minutes ago.
Well,
when I phoned up, I've obviously missed a bit. Anyway...
so what do you think I'm asking, then?
I was going to say that there's an argument about whether Jeremy Corbyn is or is not anti-Semitic, and it's just... It's.
But what question do you think I've been asking all morning?
What is the question that you've been asking is, does the Labour Party have a problem with anti-Semitism?
No, it isn't.
Correct?
No.
Is it? Well, what's the question? I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. That's okay. Maybe have a little listen and then ring back. Ian's in Tel Aviv. We'll try again on that phone line. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I hope you can hear me better.
That's much better, yes.
Yeah, good. I want to sort of, if I can give you a bit of my understanding of the things that you've said this morning and then link it to Mr. Corbyn.
Okay, you've got 3 or 4 minutes. I hope that's enough.
Yeah, I'll do it very quickly. I live in Israel. I'm, heaven knows, critical of Israeli policy, but I think sort of criticism of Israel goes into anti-Semitism when Israeli actions are compared to those of the Nazis, for example, or when people start saying Israel should not exist.
I completely agree with you. What? Just out of interest, what policies are you critical of? When you ask to do a question, you're going to get like 3 or 4 different answers. I think there's unnecessary hardship on Palestinians in the West Bank. That Israel, even if we're not at an end solution with the Palestinians, we could do a lot to alleviate. So what is the current policy that you disapprove of then specifically? Because I mean, it's perhaps a little unfair of you to have to carry this can, but I find an awful lot of people.
I'd like to see Palestinian labourers being allowed more freely into Israel, because I think when people can work and can put bread on their table and have more economic links to a country that might not be their friend, you're going to have more of a chance of reaching.
And where do we stand on the occupied territories?
For 40 years, since I'm now in my 50s, I've dreamed of like a 2-state solution.
Yes.
And I think on both sides we've got to start looking at different solutions. I'm not saying like a 1-state solution, because that would...
So just in terms of the Israeli government...
I believe in a 2-state...
The Israeli government's policy on the illegal the Israeli government's current policy on the illegal settlements. Do you disapprove of that?
It doesn't regard them as being illegal. It's carrying on its building policy. But even amongst the Israeli left, we regard certain of what you call the settlements as being as part of Israel, and others as being illegal. So it's an extremely complex.
Okay, so just to clarify, when you say that you are a critic, hang on, when you say that you are a critic of a lot of Israeli government policies, you mean that Palestinian labourers should be able to come in and out of the country more easily?
That's one example, and then movement within the West Bank if Israel controls certain routes, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we've established that. We've established the depth and the extent of your criticism of the Israeli government. Talk to me about anti-Semitism.
Yeah, right. Now, the unique thing, and this is what I think a lot of people who maybe aren't Jewish don't understand about anti-Semitism as opposed to other forms of racism, is that what is anti-Semitism? It's blaming the Jew for almost anything. In other words, you can blame him for being a Bolshevik, a capitalist, a rich North London property owner, whatever you want. I mean, even in for example, in Trump's administration, there's part of it blames sort of Jewish control of his administration.
Losing the phone line again.
The opposition to Trump for being controlled by like Soros and world Jewry, and that kind of I think emphasizes how it's almost a universal thing. It's like finding anything. And then it becomes expedient. I'm
going to stop you there because I sense that if I don't, you may carry on talking until Christmas. But I'm familiar with the way that Soros has been inflated as a synonym. He's the new Rothschild in a way. You're not, with respect, you're not telling me anything that I don't already know. So, with reference very specifically to Jeremy Corbyn and this mural, what did you ring in to say?
Right, that's what I'm saying. What I was saying previously is that leads to the tag or using anti-Semitism becomes expedient. And that's what Mr. Corbyn has done with this mural. He should have condemned it 100% when it happened. If it had been a black, yellow, pink, or whatever color person that was targeted on that mural,
but you know that his defence is he didn't realise it was anti-Semitic. No, I apologise if it was the fault of the phone line that kept you talking while I was trying to clarify stuff that you'd already said. It is anti-Semitic, the mural. It categorically is. Jeremy Corbyn has... I don't want to say admitted, has concurred. Jeremy Corbyn has agreed with reality. His argument, his claim is that when he effectively supported the idea that it shouldn't be taken down, he didn't realise it was anti-Semitic. I find that pathetic. But that speaks to his competence and possibly his honesty. It doesn't speak to his alleged bigotry or, in this case, anti-Semitism. I'll take a couple more calls up till 11:30. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Is this mural anti-Semitic? Yes. Is Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitic? I don't think so. Does the Labour Party have a problem, a growing problem, with anti-Semitism within its ranks? Well, don't ask me. Jeremy Corbyn says it does. Quite a few of you are pointing out I am taking no prisoners today. That's the way you have to be on an issue like this. You have to essentially argue furiously with everybody who is either misrepresenting reality or indulging, whether they realise it or not, in bigotries and prejudices. But this is what I meant at the very outset when I said, well, how do normal people cope? How do people who haven't got this ludicrously overdeveloped look at me gene that you need to do this for a living, or indeed people whose skin is so thick that frankly they could scratch themselves with a garden rake and not notice? I presume that the bombardment of very often personal and almost always vitriolic abuse is designed to stop you criticising. And now you don't know what I'm talking about. What word was I going to put after criticising? Was I going to put the word Israel, or was I going to put the word Corbyn? Because they both fit perfectly. The tirade, the cavalcade, the torrent of vitriolic and often very personal abuse directed at anybody who dares to criticise Corbyn or who dares to criticise Israeli policies. To my money, and I speak as something of an expert, or as Daddy Pig would say, I am a bit of an expert. For my money, they're identical. I'll tell you something else you're not going to like. The hardcore Corbyn supporters, for my money now, are as bonkers as the Brexit bunch. The extremities of both fringes. How do I know? Well, I cautiously and modestly suggest I probably get more contact from both of those constituencies than anyone else in the country. Rose is in Swaffham, lovely part of the world. Rose, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thank you so much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I worked and lived in a Palestinian refugee camp for 5 years. And you have covered a lot of this, but really it's the Zionism making the point between anti-Semitism and Zionism.
Yes.
But also that the Semites are the Arabs too.
I'm familiar with that, but I find it a little bit... I don't know why people point that out, because when we talk about anti-Semitism, everybody knows what we mean. We don't mean unjustified prejudice against everybody of a Semitic background. We mean anti-Jewish bigotry. So I always work on the premise everybody understands that, and with the greatest of love and affection, I'm always slightly confused when people feel the need to point it out.
Well, there is so much prejudice against the Arabs, but that's never brought up as anti-Semitism, is it?
No.
Which it should be.
Well, I think normally it would be called, if they were of the Muslim faith, you'd call it Islamophobia, or you could call it...
Of course. Of course.
So again, I say, when I say anti-Semitic, I know what I mean. You know what I mean.
You mean.
1 million people listening know what I mean. So why do we feel the need to clarify what we mean?
Because so many of the Zionist believers use anti-Semitism against the Arabs, because anti-Semitism was redefined back in 1948 as to mean the Jews. And the Arabs and all the other
But you know what I mean when I say anti-Semitism.
I do.
I know what I mean. Everybody listening knows what I mean. So why are we having a conversation about what I mean?
But the thing is...
Or rather, why are we having a conversation about what I don't mean?
Yeah, but the anti-Semitism is brought up a lot, and it is disgusting, and I think that mural is disgusting as well.
There we go.
However...
Oh.
It's not often brought up in conversations like this when Islamophobia takes place, or anti-Semitism against the Arabs.
You think that this this little outpost of the British media hasn't been a doughty and tireless critic
no, you are.
of anti-Muslim sentiment.
Every day.
Well, you can't. There's only 180 that I'm on air. Well, I appreciate. I think you rang in earlier, and Beth decided that your contribution was of such a high calibre that we should squeeze you in before the end. So it may be that a lot of water has passed under the bridge, and a lot of the points you wanted to make have been made. But I'm a little bit. Yes. Okay.
They have. I mean, the other thing.
What is? Hang on a minute. So help me out with Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism issue.
Well,
I don't think he is anti-Semitic, but this mural that he essentially defended patently is. He himself has said that the party has a problem with pockets of anti-Semitism. Bearing in mind that we now all know what we mean by that phrase, what do you think anti-Semitism that's being tolerated in the Labour Party at the moment looks like?
Well, I'm actually a member of the Labour Party.
Perfect, then. You couldn't be better qualified.
And I go to Labour Party meetings every month, and I go to, constituency party meetings as well. And everything that's come down in the Norfolk branches is not particularly anti-Semitic. It's quite balanced, actually. So whether it's a problem nearer the top of the Labour Party, I don't know. But I can certainly say for the grassroots level...
Well, no, you can say for the monthly meetings that you have attended. Yeah. You can't say for the grassroots level any more than I can.
Well, no, the Swaffham meetings, I mean.
Yeah, OK. So there's no anti-Semitism in Swaffham?
No, and I actually put a motion through the Labour Party Swaffham meeting the other day to go to the constituency party about Trump's thing on Israel. And they were very balanced about the whole thing, as was my motion, actually. But... no, I would say by what I've seen in all the meetings that I've been to in the last year, that it's not particularly it's balanced.
So Jeremy Corbyn's wrong when he says there are pockets of anti-Semitism in the party he leads.
I haven't seen it, or heard it, I have to say.
No, but he has.
He has probably up at the top.
Probably. So he could be lying.
Sorry?
He could be lying then when he says that he's got problems with this.
Well, he could be.
Yeah. Do you think he is?
Because, James, there's just one more thing that I would like to say.
Anything.
The occupation is immoral under international law. Is wrong.
Well, international law doesn't make moral judgments. Illegal under international law.
It's illegal.
Israel, of course, say they don't recognise.
So the Zionist movement has ramped up the anti-Semitic argument.
Oh, here we go. No. We're talking about a mural.
No, I know that, James.
But you don't want to talk about a mural because then you can't make broader points about Zionism.
Well, Zionism is pretty...
So you're going to make those broader points anyway, even though I've just reminded you that we're talking about a mural. But there's no anti-Semitism in the Swaffham Labour Party.
Having lived in it in 5 years, James, it needs to be made. It really does. It's
what does?
That goes on. It's hideous what the state of Israel or Zionism does on the ground in Palestine. And I lived in a refugee camp for 5 years.
You mentioned it, and you rang me to talk about a mural.
Disgusting. Yes, I did.
You said you didn't, did you? It's 27 minutes after 11. Ian is in East Barnet. Ian, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'd just like to make a link between the mural and the debate about Zionism. I'd just like to say right off the bat that I'm an Israeli and I'm against the occupation. And I've actually served in the IDF in the West Bank, and I think the whole settlement...
You come sneaking in at the end like this with your astonishing CV of qualifications to comment on this issue.
Thank you. And I think that the settlement movement is a mistake. But it's quite interesting that we have to say that off the bat, that I have to say what I think about Israel.
Well, you don't have to. You don't have to. I just find quite often when people say to me, I am a staunch critic of the state of Israel, and then they go on to mount a fairly passionate defence of a lot of what the state of Israel does, I sometimes ask people to qualify what exactly they're critics of. I wouldn't necessarily have asked you to do so, but you've done so anyway, and your credentials are impeccable.
Thank you. So the mural really reminds me of tropes from the Nazi era, of capitalism and America and those kind of stereotyped Jewish faces. And in my discussions with people on the left, and I'm a floating voter now. I used to vote for Labour. I don't know who to vote for.
I don't think I trust anyone that isn't a floating voter at the moment, Ian, to be honest with you. Go on.
And I think that the link is seeing Israel as a globalist and imperialist outpost of the West, and I think that's the issue that I've seen to have...
By which you mean, to clarify, because we're going to run out of time, if you have that imperial hangover where you somehow believe that your lot should be able to ride roughshod over everybody else, then you feel that some people see, from both sides of this argument, some people would see Israel as a latter-day representative of that ideology.
Yes, and so anti-Semitism is seen as punching up, not punching down.
See, my mystery has always been why right-wingers... who, as we've seen in American politics recently, will in many cases be pretty close to Nazism, are such staunch defenders of Israel. And I've heard two accounts of that now. The first is that the really, really virulent ones want Israel to exist because ultimately they want every Jew in the world to move there and stop living next door to them and in their country. And the other one possibly is what you've just described, which is Israel is a country that does, according to international law, treat its neighbours or treat people who aren't part of that country in a way that people with imperial sympathies and ambitions would quite like to be able to behave elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, and of course my family in Israel are all from Yemen and Iraq and Morocco, and they're actually locals, you know, and it's a complicated, it's quite a complex issue, but...
No, it is a complex issue, but it gets easier if you start with the same building blocks, and I think that's what callers like you have helped me to do today, and that's why I think we've made a little bit of progress, although a couple of my callers may disagree.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's fair to say that it's not a right-wing conspiracy. It's certainly not a unjustified smear campaign, and neither is it anymore something that can be written off as a storm in a teacup. Jeremy Corbyn has a deep and profound problem with elements of his own party and his own past with reference to the persecution and abuse of Jewish people within the British Labour Party, Jewish people within the context of Israel's right to exist as opposed to its right to ride roughshod over international law. That seems to me to be a crucial distinction that many people miss. And also, perhaps what confuses me most as a fully paid-up member of the liberal elite, I think what confuses me most is why Labour Party members, why people committed ostensibly to decency and equality can't see the problem. And I think that's the question that I'm going to ask. I don't know how much... I don't want to... well, I do obviously want to upset lots of people. So I get out of bed in the morning. But I don't necessarily want to upset people for the wrong reasons. So I'm not sure that you will be much use to me if you do subscribe to the school of thought that says there isn't a problem here. You will struggle to believe this, but obviously I operate in some of the more eccentric corners of social media and internet, or rather I attract a lot of attention from the more eccentric corners of social media and the internet, but there is still a significant swathe of cultists trying to argue that the mural at the centre of this controversy isn't anti-Semitic, despite the fact that Jeremy Corbyn has absolutely categorically stated his conviction that it is. So people who don't think that there is a problem here, you're the people I'm talking about. I don't know that you can be the people I'm talking to. I don't know. I'll leave it up to Beth. She's on the phones today. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. I don't really understand, as you know, the distinctions anymore between left and right. I don't know what it means. I find myself agreeing with pretty much everything, for example, that Matthew Parris writes in the Times newspaper, and he is, of course, a former Conservative MP and very much a commentator from the right wing of British politics. For the record, I think my second favourite columnist in the country is probably Peter Oborne, whose politics are also a million miles away from what I would a few years ago have told you mine were. So I do, however, and a Republican politician said this, so take it up with him, not with me, the idea that the... what did he say? Something like Republicans think that everybody's evil and Democrats think that everybody's fundamentally good. And for me, whether you like this or not, the break between the left and the right in this country has always seemed that way to me. I think there's I genuinely think there's a way you could construe political convictions that hinges upon the mistaken notion that everybody's the same as I am. If you're on the left, you think that deep down, everybody must want a world that offers up an essentially equal
opportunity to everybody else. Everybody wants a world where your freedom of speech or your rights before the law or your access to a health service or an education service or on pretty much on a level playing field. So if you're on your left, if you're on the left of politics, that's what you believe. You believe that deep, deep down inside, everybody wants a fair and just world. And then, of course, you realise that's not true because you've got Nazis, you've got white supremacists, you've got fascists, you've got alt-right activists, you've got people who clearly believe that equality is a bad thing, that people who are a different colour from them are inferior. I know there's a delicious irony in the fact that most exponents of white supremacism and the master race appear to be a million miles away from anything that the rest of us would describe as superior genetically or ethnically, but you know that it exists. And again, whether you like it or not, that is essentially a right-wing position, an extreme right-wing position, I grant you, but if you're looking at the direction of traffic, the direction towards Nazism, towards fascism, towards white supremacism, towards what's laughably known as alt-right ideology now in this world, in the West in particular, that is, I'm afraid, traffic moving towards the right wing of the species, towards the right wing of humanity. For me, traffic that moves towards the left wing has always been about trying to level the playing field, trying to redistribute wealth more fairly, not by any stretch of the imagination in a communist or even a socialist way in terms of the means of production and who owns it. I think that you need incentives to go the extra mile in life, and if you're born with more talent than the other person, I think you still need more incentives to properly fulfill that talent. There's a very interesting story bubbling under about cleaners at the Daily Mail, and it had an angle to it that I hadn't foreseen. And this is fascinating. So I think, and I haven't quite got to the bottom of it yet because it's rather hard to get a comment, but I think that cleaners who are mostly from overseas at the Daily Mail, who were being paid a relative pittance, have combined forces and unionised and earned quite a substantial pay rise that some people think puts them on more money than trainee reporters on the Daily Mail. Now, people like me hold that up as ironic, but actually I'm not left-wing in the proper sense, because some people then return and point out why shouldn't cleaners earn more than journalists? I can't answer that question yet, but do you see what I mean? That's how I know I'm not left-wing in that sense, because I think that the rewards you receive in life should have some reflection of your talents, qualifications and efforts hitherto. Not all. I'm all in favour of cleaners getting paid more than they used to get paid, but I'm not sure I'm in favour yet of cleaners being paid more than journalists. I'm certainly not in favour of everybody getting paid the same. These are the kind of hooks of extreme left-wing politics that anybody who suggests that poverty is bad, racism is evil, and homophobia is not very nice, anybody who generally subscribes to those three schools of thought gets boxed into these ludicrous extreme left corners by right-wing critics who are terrified of having to give up their unearned privileges. Covering a lot of ground today. Have you worked out what the topic is yet? Here it is. So for me, the left of politics is supposed to be the side that sticks up for the oppressed. Whether it's a massive constituency of people that are being oppressed, i.e. the workers being oppressed by the owners, which is, if you will, the sort of fundamental premise of Marxism, or whether it is a minority being oppressed by a majority. Whether or not all of that majority is complicit in the oppression doesn't matter. If you're of colour, if you are Jewish, if you are Muslim, there are tides moving in this country that look pretty toxic. And it is essentially a left-wing position to defend those minorities from abuse. So why is it different in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party for Jews? Why is it different? 0345 6060 973. I know that all roads will probably lead to Israel, but they really shouldn't. Because a conversation about domestic British politics doesn't have to reference the Middle East. Why do Jewish people feel persecuted by some pockets, to use Jeremy Corbyn's own words? This is the point. If you're uncomfortable with the description of that mural as anti-Semitic or the description of the Labour Party as containing pockets of anti-Semitism, don't take it up with me, take it up with the dear leader. These are his words. So let's focus on his words and ask why. Not only why are there pockets of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, because you could argue that there are probably pockets of anti-Semitism within any grouping of human beings pretty much anywhere in the world. This is the Jewish experience. But why are there pockets of anti-Semitism in a political movement that people like me have always somewhat naively presumed is dedicated to opposing discrimination of all kinds? Of all kinds. And that, I think, is the mystery. So, with the greatest of love and respect, if you think there aren't pockets of anti-Semitism in the party, or you think the mural isn't anti-Semitic, or you think this is all a right-wing conspiracy and sort of a couple of thousand Jewish people turned out in Westminster last night because they've had their strings pulled by some sinister puppet masters, not only are you engaging in a anti-Semitic stereotype by even thinking that, but you're probably not going to be much use to me in understanding why you're so bigoted and prejudiced, because you don't realise that you are bigoted and prejudiced. And here's the thing I have learnt from my dealings with people on the other side of the political table. People who are bigoted and prejudiced really, really hate having it proved. There's nothing they hate more than having a mirror held up in front of them, and what they see in the mirror makes them howl. It makes them howl and scream, gnash their teeth and keen, and I don't understand why. Because when Steve Bannon stood up in France the other day and told them to be proud of being called racists, that to me seemed the natural conclusion of the kind of politics that Donald Trump's former campaign manager and one of the key players with Breitbart quotes, news end quotes. That seems to me to be the end place of his personal outlook on the world. Yes, you know, we are ethno-nationalists, or whatever phrase you want to use. So yeah, we do think you should be treated differently according to your race. I don't know why racists are so embarrassed to be called racist. I think it's probably one of the last legacies of political correctness. But we always historically associate it with the right wing. What's going on in the Labour Party? Why do Jews get this special treatment, if you will, in the most negative of senses, from people who politically should be committed to opposing discrimination, exploitation, division? And if you can't answer that without reference to Israel, because the only answer I can conceive of at the moment is, but they're not the oppressed, they're the oppressors. Just look at Gaza. If that's all you've got, you've already lost. You've already lost. Because the idea that every Jewish person in this country is somehow a slavish devotee of everything that Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party have done over the last decade or so is palpably absurd. You are generalizing. You're taking the behavior of one person and maligning everybody of a similar ethnicity or religion as a result of the bad behavior of somebody else. That's the definition, in many ways, of bigotry. So, unless you can do this without referencing Israel, I suspect you're part of the problem and don't realise it. That's my challenge, at least. I could be wrong. For the rest of us, it's looking from the outside into the dark heart of these pockets of anti-Semitism that Jeremy Corbyn has finally conceded exist within the Labour Party. And you're left with two questions. The first is, why are they there? I know they exist in humanity, but why are they in the Labour movement? 0345 606 0973. And the second question is, why the hell has it taken Jeremy Corbyn so long to admit something so obvious to so many? This is a nice start from the correctly or aptly named Ponderful on Twitter, doing some pondering. At least I hope that's what the name refers to. From my experience as a youngster, I bought into the capitalist conspiracy theories involving the Morgans and the Rothschilds. I knew nothing of them except their wealth and supposed power. I didn't know some were Jewish. Anti-capitalist conspiracy theory sells well with the left. If you're just tuning in, that's a beautiful introduction to the question that I'm trying to ask, which is, how has a political movement that is supposed to be diametrically opposed to discrimination, racism, oppression of minorities, how has it ended up with such a massive anti-Semitism problem? And if you don't like the use of the word massive in that sentence, then just ignore it and tell me how the Labour Party has ended up with an anti-Semitism problem. Because I don't think you can do it without referencing Israel. And if you can't do it without referencing Israel, you kind of proved the point, I think. Matthew's in Romford. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I can't do it without referencing Israel, I'm afraid.
Oh.
So I don't think...
Well, hang on. I can't do it with this phone line either, so we'll try. That's an appalling start to the phone-in element of the programme. I do apologise. Matthew, we'll try and improve your phone line. David is in Tunbridge Wells. David, what do you think?
Hi, James. My theory is that the Labour Party, or certain people within the Labour Party, have a narrative of sort of anti-globalisation, and that.
What does that mean? I'm not having a pop. I just want to be clear what we mean by the word globalisation. We mean the recognition of 21st century reality, which is that we're just as likely to do trade via the computer involving somebody on the other side of the world as we are to go to the corner shop.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with that, or that there's a problem with globalization.
Or are we talking about the concentration of massive amounts of wealth in the hands of an ever smaller supranational elite? You know, your oligarchs, your people who don't really recognise national boundaries or loyalties. All they recognise is money, and that's closer to what you're saying, I think.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Okay.
So, and within that context, it's far easier for people to be able to feel comfortable being anti-Semitic. And the comparison I would make is with UKIP, where the policies are right-wing, anti-immigrant. It allows people to be far more comfortable with being racist. So you end up with pockets of racism within UKIP.
Pockets?
And a lot of racism.
I tell you what, if you can find a pocket of non-racism, I'll give you the money myself.
And then the reason why I suggest this is if you go back to the mural, which is undoubtedly anti-Semitic, the point of that mural was supposed to be about globalization and global capital.
Well, it was about a small number of powerful people ruling the world and getting rich on the backs of working people, and some of the people were deliberately and definitively portrayed according to Jewish stereotypes.
So when you have the Labour Party blaming the ills of globalisation for everything that's going wrong in this country,
yes,
there's bound to be, like there is an underlying layer of racism in this country. There's bound to be an underlying layer of anti-Semitism in places in this country. When you start criticising globalisation as the cause of all the problems in this country, I think you're inevitably is the wrong thing to say, but inevitably going to get people who jump on top of that narrative and point to, because that's always been the conspiracy theory, isn't it, that Jewish people control.
So this is, if you will, the difference between left-wing and right-wing racism will be right-wing racism essentially says my life is a bit rubbish. I would love to find someone to blame. Right?
Yes.
And therefore, the politician steps forward and says, oh, well, look, there's some people here speaking foreign on a train. Why don't you blame them for the fact that you're a bit of an idiot and you can't get a girlfriend? Yes, thank you very much. Or here's someone who's brown. Why don't you blame him for the fact that your wife's left you? Yeah, oh, great, fantastic. Right-wing racism scapegoats. Left-wing racism looks at injustice rather than personal inadequacy and seeks a simplistic solution to that injustice, which is there are the baddies, and in this case, they're Jews.
Yeah, and I could just make one quick point.
Of course you can, yeah.
There's this sort of widespread, I don't know whether you can sort of remember further back than me, but...
Unlikely. How old are you?
To me that... 32.
Oh, well, maybe. Go on, give me a chance.
It feels like recently everyone has to blame somebody for society's problems, so I think that the EU has been blamed for a lot of society's problems. Immigrants have.
Yes.
And I think there's a narrative that comes on the sort of centre-left, which still says bankers are to blame, globalisation is to blame,
and that leaks into anti-Semitism. Although I believe some of those centre-left convictions that you've just described. I think the concentration of wealth in an ever smaller number of hands is both profoundly dangerous and real. And I think bankers were to blame for the last financial crisis. Certainly a hell of a lot more than all the public sector workers who've not had a pay rise for 8 years as a result of it were. I never quite, and I don't know if this is background education or luck, I never quite see how that then leaps or leads to Jewish people. Is that just the influences I was exposed to growing up? I never heard this stuff about the Rothschilds. I used to knock about with a Rothschild. He was excellent company. I never knew that they were supposed to be the enemy. I've seen it with Soros, But possibly I'm too young and you're too young to have seen it the first time round. And maybe the reason why the right wing have managed to steer clear in the West from the kind of anti-Semitism that historically would have been their territory is because the memory of Nazism and the Holocaust is so fresh. So if you're going to stand up, I always remember, you've mentioned UKIP, I always remember when they were campaigning to ban slaughter without stunning, and their agricultural spokesman said to a senior Jewish person, "Oh, really sorry, we didn't mean you, it's collateral damage," which was their way of saying we don't give a monkeys about the animals, this is just a good way of upsetting Muslims, and unfortunately the thing we're using to upset them is going to upset you as well. So right-wing people have known that they can't really open up the door of anti-Semitism because of the last 100 years, whereas left-wing people, because perhaps they feel that they're part of the anti-Nazi establishment, they feel empowered now to start criticising Jewish people in a way that right-wing people aren't yet confident enough to do so, or am I overthinking it, David?
Oh, no, I think that's entirely right. My last point was just that in saying I think bankers are to blame, actually there may be a few hundred bankers who are to blame.
Yeah.
But there's probably thousands and thousands of bankers who have done absolutely nothing.
Oh, and the word again, as I did with globalisation at the beginning of your call, you actually need to define what you mean by the word banker. You're absolutely right. I'm close to framing some sort of definition that hinges upon the notion of making loads more money doing no work from a company where the people doing the work make much less than you, and that wouldn't even necessarily be banker, would it? It's a notion of investment to the exclusion of all else, all other expenditures within a business model, which again is increasingly common and increasingly popular. I thank you, David. You're helping. The clouds are clearing. The plot thins, as you might say. Morris is in Kensington. Morris, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I think, and hear me out on this, I actually think that Jeremy Corbyn suffers from the same sort of issue Farage has. So check this out. Farage turns up at the AFD rally and all these sort of so-called ethno-nationalists, if we could put it that way.
No, they're Nazis, mate.
Exactly. There you go. And then Farage comes out and says, "I'm not a racist."
Does he say that? You forgive me, I'm not. Last I heard, he'd taken out a full-page advert in the Telegraph apologising for being one on this programme.
And then similarly to Jeremy, Jeremy says Jeremy finds himself around people that say things not very nice about Jews, but Jeremy isn't an anti-Semite, if that makes sense. So how can I paint this properly? It's like a cabbie that puts on a police officer's uniform, and then someone says, "Arrest him, help us," talking to the cabbie now in the police officer's uniform. And then the cabbie turns up and says, "No, I'm not a police officer." Well, why are you wearing a police officer's uniform?
I don't know that. Did you just ask me if that makes sense? Not even a little bit.
So my point is...
Are you really going to keep digging?
Oh, no, not at all.
No, I don't mean that in a rude way. I'm a massive fan of the tortured analogy, Morris. But I think you might have just kicked it up to a whole new level. So I don't understand, and I'm not sure the comparison with other politicians is helpful either, because Jeremy Corbyn has a particular problem here, and I don't fully understand why. But I think part of what you're saying is it's the people around him and his failure to properly condemn or disassociate himself from them. So while you'd struggle to find anything that you could put on the charge sheet for him being accused of anti-Semitism himself, you can't... Well, hang on a minute. You're on a bus with people who are pretty flipping bald in their bigotry, and you haven't got off the bus, or you haven't chucked them off the bus.
Because, like you rightly said earlier, the people that say certain anti-Semitic things about Jews think at this moment that the Palestinians are being traumatized. And like you said earlier...
But you can't... I don't understand how it would be like hating... Well, actually, I know. Maybe we're being a bit unfair. You kind of look at the actions of any country and...
Yes.
You end up maligning every resident of that country, and because Israel has this unique status where the Jewish people see Israel as their homeland even if they've never been there, you have this blurring of geographical and cultural and political lines. So every Jew ends up being held responsible for the actions of Israel, which is palpably absurd, but perhaps not unprecedented. Going to be joined by Chris Patten, Lord Patten, as he is now, in about an hour's time, to discuss... Well, I mean, these sort of senior Conservatives who are having to put their head above the parapet and point out the utter madness of the current state of the country, particularly with regard to Brexit, because no one in the parliamentary party is prepared to do it, or if they are, no one notices. Very strange state of affairs. But we're not talking about the Conservative Party today. We're talking about the Labour Party, and particularly their problem with anti-Semitism, and if you're uncomfortable with that description, take it up with Jeremy Corbyn. The phrase he used was pockets of anti-Semitism. Very strong stuff coming in via text and tweet today. 0345 6060973 is the number you need if you want to get your voice heard. I just want to refer you to a couple of them, which I'll sort of respond to on air. Let me get this one right. I think, yeah, here you go. I think it is wrong and hypocritical of the media, right, Zander, to pin this on Labour, to insist and magnify the relevance of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party when the recent big push for division and polarisation has come from the right. That's precisely my point, Zander. I've obviously not explained it very well. Why is a party that is supposed to be diametrically opposed to discrimination, the demonisation of minorities, the scapegoating, the blaming of ethnicities or religions for massive problems in a whole society, why is it happening within a party that's supposed to be diametrically opposed to all that? So I don't think it's wrong or hypocritical to focus on this question, because whether this upsets you or not, I don't really care. I see bigotry and prejudice as much more right-wing problems than left-wing, which is why this is. And it's also why right-wing people who have no problem with bigotry and prejudice jump all over these stories involving left-wingers turning out also to be, because they're essentially saying, ha-ha, you see this in American politics much more than in British politics. So, yeah, you see? Yeah, what about her emails? It's always, yeah, I know you are, but what am I? That kind of thing. And that's why Labour has to deal with these things, I think, much more robustly than right-wing organisations do, because left-wing organisations aren't supposed to be racist. And then perhaps we need to clock the horseshoe element of this conversation as well, maybe. When it comes to the conspiracy theory that the world is run by and for the benefit of a tiny Jewish cabal of super rich people, right-wing and left-wing conspiracists believe that. So maybe we're back to our Islamo-fascist, actual fascist horseshoe, and the people who really do want some sort of race war to unfold should just get on with it and leave the 95% of us who aren't extremists, actually I can't say that anymore, the 80% of us who aren't extremists out of the picture altogether. Stephen is in Tel Aviv. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning. Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned something, and it's brought to mind. Labour has now recognised that it has pockets of anti-Semitism.
Jeremy Corbyn has. There's plenty of people in the party who still deny it.
Let's name the man. Unfortunately, they appear to be very deep. It came to mind, to paraphrase their election slogan, "We have many, not the few." And I think the fact is, Jewish society, and I lived amongst it for many, many years, yes. Certainly from the 1940s, showing my age, felt very safe and clear and voted for Wilson, Kinnock, Blair, Brown, and never, felt perturbed, not to that degree. I'm sure there was an undercurrent. There might have been.
Do you think so? I mean, the Labour Party had a Jewish leader up until the current fella, Ed Miliband. I don't think he's practicing, but that wouldn't have saved him from being slaughtered during the Holocaust, would it? They'd have looked at the details of his birth and shipped him out. So that always struggles as well.
Yes. But I wasn't going to talk about where I'm situated at the moment. And Ed Miliband's approach was a little bit different, and perhaps the Jewish Society never agreed with him fully on that basis. So that's a good point. But let's get back to yesterday. I mean, it was a very dignified and well-run demonstration yesterday, I felt. But the main problem of this is from the top. The perception and words and actions. The perception is there, the words are there, but we're not seeing any actions. And basically, it's very clear that it's being stirred from the top, and people are jumping on board. There's a lot of fellow travellers that have joined in recent years, and it's obviously stirred and spiked a fear in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot. I respect that fear. I don't know quite what you mean by it's being stirred from the top. This seems to me to have actually come, if you will, from the bottom, which is where Corbyn was in the context of the Labour Party hierarchy until becoming leader. That's not a criticism. He was the maverick. He was the rebel. He was the voice in the wilderness. So, but possibly it's been stirred from the top in the last 2 years, but not historically.
No, not historically. That's what I meant. I mean,
and what is it? Can we do it? It's going to be tricky for you because you're in Tel Aviv. But can we account for what this anti-Semitism is without referencing Israel?
Well, I think it's a deep conviction, one way or another. And I think the mural the other day really came to the fore, where his original take on it was, it says the point that he wants to get over, and didn't look any further into it, and it was very clear to other eyes. And he didn't have he didn't really see anything in it. I think when the criticism came back, he woke up to it and was quite, it seemed to surprise him, which he shouldn't have done. And that's the clear point.
But where's the but? What's the thing they won't say out loud? And when I say they, I'm happy to clarify that as either a tiny proportion or a few individuals. But when people, there's a but, isn't there, that's implicit in all of this stuff. I am a militant opponent of anti-Semitism, but and the thing that people won't say out loud is I do believe that Jews exercise disproportionate influence over international affairs, as is evinced by the special status of Israel in the context of Middle Eastern realpolitik. Is that the unspoken suspicion, the unspoken prejudice?
I believe so. And not only that, we don't hide ourselves. We're not the victim. We are not the victim. We are willing to stand up, assimilate, and try to make a life for ourselves in a great country like the UK.
I hear you, and I know that you're right. And I mean, for all the unhappiness of the current situation, we do remain one of the most tolerant places on the planet. Not as tolerant as we were a few years ago, but we're a hell of a lot more tolerant than a lot of other places. But I've been called anti-Semitic in the past for describing the occupied territories as illegal, which they are. I've been described as anti-Semitic in the past for criticising bombing campaigns against the Gaza Strip. I've been described as anti-Semitic for reading out on Wikipedia the comparative casualty levels of people living in Gaza and people living in Israel. And I've been called anti-Semitic for pointing out the astonishing disparity between the defence dome that Israel has and the defences that Palestinian children have when bombs start raining down on them, i.e. none. And I still will continue to point out these disparities and to my mind, these imbalances and unfairnesses. The thing is, if you call me anti-Semitic for doing that, do you think there's a danger of it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because if I was made of less thoughtful stuff or angrier stuff, you call me anti-Semitic for criticising Likud or Israel government policy, and I respond by saying, you bloody Jews, how dare you? Do you see what I mean? Do you see how people might fall into that trap?
Well, absolutely.
You do? Good. Thank God for that.
No, absolutely. But you're talking where Jeremy Corbyn comes from.
I think I might be. I think I might be.
I'm a great supporter of Israel, and I can tell you something. I can tell you something very clearly, and of course this is our not so much argument, but I know for sure that if there was a mandate now for the Palestinians, we'd be very happy. We want peace. We can help the Palestinians.
Well, no, we as in, you can't, no one can say we. As in something that would enjoy the full support of the whole of Israel.
Well,
I mean, but
a major percentage of us certainly want peace, and I know what we can bring to the Palestinians. We can bring water, work, building, construction, a life for them, living side by side. There's no question about it.
Well, I'm not. Like, I doff my cap to you. Well, you may be that, and the other argument, of course, is the opposite, which is until you give us our land back, how can we ever agree to a compromise or a concord? But that is partly why. I probably shouldn't have broken my own rule of not bringing Israel into this conversation, which was a slightly facetious suggestion because it was obviously going to prove impossible. But I wonder whether that is it. Okay, how about this? Is this going to work? This might be a little bit tricky. Did I just describe you? You started off as someone on the left of British politics who was, whether rightly or wrongly, a harsh critic of Israeli policies in the Gaza Strip, in the occupied territories, on the West Bank, in Jerusalem, a very harsh critic of those things. And you were told you were anti-Semitic for criticising Israel. I don't know whether this is going to work on a phone-in, but I wonder whether that actually did almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you're going to get called anti-Semitic for example, condemning the bombing of a hospital, could it actually lead you to making sweeping and unfair generalisations about everybody who is like the person who called you anti-Semitic? I don't know. The Migration Advisory Committee reports today that some firms are already reporting difficulties in recruiting staff as European Union or workers from the European Economic Area appear increasingly less likely to want to come here, which is, in a way, the Brexit situation distilled in a nutshell. Some people are going, good, great, good, we don't want them here, there's too many. Other people, what you would have to describe as the sane, rational people, not racists, will respond by going, oh, that's bad because the businesses might go bust. 10:51 is the time. Back to Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party and anti-Semitism. A really tricky question. You have to recognise that there are some very unpleasant people in the world who sometimes will take something very, very obviously within context. They'll remove it from that context and try to use it to claim that you're saying something very different from what you are saying. So I choose my words very carefully. Is it possible? Because I've been exposed to it when I've criticised Israeli policies. And his historical injustices as well, not just contemporaneous ones. I have been called anti-Semitic, which is both laughable and hurtful, weirdly. And I wonder whether, if I was made just a very slightly different way, that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because so much of what I see does the conflation. Oh, you can't criticise Israel without being called anti-Semitic. And they're right. Actually, you can't criticise Israel without being called anti-Semitic. But that doesn't mean that the people calling you anti-Semitic when you criticise Israel are representative of either all Israelis or all Jews. That would be absurd. So oddly, there's a generalisation on both sides of that exchange. I'm going to criticise Israel for this decision, for this policy. You're going to call me anti-Semitic. Therefore, I think, if I don't think much, I conclude that all Jews think that if you criticise Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Therefore, I'm opposed to all Jews. Therefore, I am anti-Semitic. Have we just solved the whole thing? Seriously, why would anyone listen to anything else ever? Jason's in Peterborough, but don't spoil it, Jason. Let's just enjoy that for a moment before you pick it to shreds. What would you like to say?
No, I'm not going to pick it to shreds. What I'm going to say is maybe take it in maybe a slightly different direction.
Of course.
Is if we were back in the 60s and the 70s, we might actually use an old-fashioned term of calling Jeremy Corbyn a communist.
But what do we mean by that? We mean someone who thinks that all of the means of production should be owned by the collective. They should be owned by the workers. Everyone should have a share in it, and everyone should be more or less seeking to live on according to similar incomes and similar means.
Broadly, yes.
Okay.
I think he's a very idealistic communist.
I don't know if he is or not, but he is certainly a lot closer to that position than I am.
Yeah, no, from my political standpoint, I look at Jeremy Corbyn and I kind of think you're very much a stereotypical.
Phone line, mate. Jason, I'm so sorry. I don't know why this is happening. I do know why this is happening. It's happening because we're taking so many calls, so the likelihood of getting a bad thing increases. But when Wayne texts me in capital letters saying phone line, I always think that perhaps we should try and improve it. It'd be nice if we could do this before we come on, and I know that my colleagues do, but if you then start moving around the place, it creates a scenario that we've just encountered. Let's go to David. He's in Scunthorpe. David, what would you like to say?
I believe Jeremy's actually playing to his demographic. If you look, I think he's done the math. He's worked out that he's less likely to get the Jewish vote when it comes to Labour. And if he says nothing about condemning some of the behaviours, he's more likely to get the Muslim vote.
I'd give that some oxygen if he hadn't been holding the line he holds today for the last 40 years, long before he even dreamt of seeking votes as leader of the party. His position doesn't seem to have shifted one iota since he was a thorn in the side of the party leadership, does it?
No, but I think because I'm sad to say I'm an advantage to most other people. I am Jewish, but my parents are from India, so I look Asian from every aspect.
Okay.
And I do suffer unbelievably with people who think I hold views of, Jews do run the world and Jews are responsible for the financial crash, because they think I am obviously of either Muslim or Hindu faith. They think I sort of sit in that camp.
There's going to be a lot of people unhappy with the suggestion that every Muslim or Hindu does sit in the camp that you've just described. I know you're not saying that. I'm just clarifying that. I'm just clarifying that. But you've moved the goalposts now, mate, because you may have a point when it comes to a widespread subscription to some of these conspiracy theories and beliefs among certain sections of society. But you can't say Jeremy Corbyn is cynically going after them because he wants to be Prime Minister, if what he's doing and the positions he's been holding for 4 decades. You just can't. I appreciate that's I've shot your fox, but let's not pretend that you can resurrect it.
No, I'm saying that. I'm not saying that he.
You categorically did, mate. You categorically said he's going after the Muslim vote. He's calculated he can't get the Jewish vote.
Because the reality within the Jewish community, and I would say a lot of people can not even. My parents are Labour supporters. My father was a member of the Labour Party.
You're suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn's demographic is racists and anti-Semites, which...
No.
Well, yes, you might not have meant to, but you did.
I'm not saying racist. It's the people who are not going to vote for you. The people who are going to vote for you are not going to be put off by some of the behaviour. He's not an anti-Semite. I'd say that categorically. He's not an anti-Semite. I'm not saying he is. But by coming out and saying things about anti-Semitism, and it seems like, pulling people up, he won't gain any votes from it. I'm not saying that's the view that a lot of people would hold. I'm not saying that the majority of the Muslims. I do a lot of work in the Muslim community, and I don't have that experience.
No, but you did. You posited a calculation about where he is most likely and least likely to secure votes, and I am for the third time pointing out that the positions he holds and the problems he has have been in place for 40 years, so your theory just doesn't wash. Caitlin's in Newcastle. Caitlin, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I just wanted to kind of pull back to something you said earlier with the if Labour is a party of the left, it should be diametrically opposed to these things. Yes. And I'll point out that Labour hasn't really been a party of the left for that long. If you go back to Tony Blair, they're far more of a centrist party, and I think that when you sit in that middle ground, you kind of let certain things slip, and I think much like a...
But I know, I hear you. I'm picking holes in everybody today, but that doesn't stand up to any more scrutiny than Dave's point does, because the problems with anti-Semitism haven't come from the centrist wings of the party, have they?
No, I'm just suggesting that, it's suggested that there are bad people in every party. I think if you're less of a leftist party, you're not looking at that as much of a problem and dealing with it at a grassroots.
No, it wasn't there.
Because I think
it wasn't there until it wasn't there. You wouldn't have this.
With anti-Semitism, look at Ken Livingstone. It was all over his term as London mayor. Constantly. I disagree with you. I mean, there were allegations and accusations against Ken Livingstone, but until he started trying to claim that Hitler was a Zionist, I think most of those
allegations and accusations were at least refutable. But yeah, you're right. He does seem to belong to the strand of the Labour Party that's come to the fore now. I don't quite understand how you can have it both ways. How you can say, oh, well, we didn't notice it before because the party was centrist. Oh, but look, Ken Livingstone's been doing it for years.
I just think it was a vacuum that was left untended because it didn't have to be tended to. And now, as you rightly say, Corbyn, who has
under Corbyn, it's flourished. Yeah, I understand your point better. Thank you for it. Some more after this, I think. I'm going to carry on with this. I wasn't going to, but I felt a little penny drop moment just in that last quarter, and I make no apology for using my own experiences as a lens through which to view the bigger picture, because there is something. I've told you this a million times. There's something really. I'm going to say unique. I know you can't have gradations of uniqueness. There's something unique about being called an anti-Semite, about being called anti-Semitic, because it has the recent context of the Holocaust and Nazism. Because if you call me anti-Semitic, then I hear you suggesting that I would have been on the other side to the Jews in the Second World War, and that is, I mean, that is profoundly obnoxious. And I'm like an armadillo. In fact, I'm worse than an armadillo. I actively enjoy a lot of trolling. I think it's a wonderful tribute to the ego, the amount of effort and time that some people put into trying to offend you. But that does, or did offend me. And it worked as well. I stopped criticising Israel for a while because being called anti-Semitic. And the first time I did it, I wish I'd kept my emails because I replied to every single one. That's how much I cared. I replied to every single email that was accusing me of anti-Semitic for objecting very specifically to one campaign undertaken by Israel. And I think 18 months later, the Knesset concluded that that campaign had been wrong. So if I was anti-Semitic, so was the Israeli parliament. But I thinking back, about 40% of the replies to my reply were apologetic, saying, I'm really sorry. And this is when I first came to begin to understand the issue better. It was as if you have to call me that to stop me from criticising Israel, because if you criticise Israel, one day Israel may not exist, and if Israel doesn't exist and there's another Holocaust, we will have nowhere to go again. I have 100% sympathy for that logical process. But it doesn't denude or remove the sting from the insult. So if I'm just imagining if I'd gone in a different direction, and every time I criticised Israel, I was bombarded with accusations and allegations of anti-Semitism. I still get some, which is fine now, because I know it's not true. I knew it wasn't true then, but I was upset by the idea someone could believe it. Now I don't believe anyone does believe it. They just use it as a sledgehammer to silence debate and dissent, for reasons that I do now understand. So you get caught. I just wonder if anyone would ring me and say, yeah, that is what's happened to me. Maybe you don't realise it until I describe it. Is that you criticise Israel, you get called anti-Semitic, you therefore generalise about all Jewish people and presume that they all think you're anti-Semitic just for criticising Israel. You know you're not anti-Semitic because you don't look at a Jewish person and think of them as being in any way inferior or other than you. You just got a problem with what Israel's doing in the occupied territories or in the Palestinian camps. You just got a problem with that. And someone can tell you that you're wrong to have a problem because you don't understand it. That's fine. But they can't call you anti-Semitic for holding that view. And the minute that they do, just cautiously suggesting, I'd love Jewish people as well to respond to this very cautious suggestion. If we can't think out loud, we've got a problem. That actually pushes the needle towards anti-Semitism. You call someone anti-Semitic when they're not, for doing something that they consider to be a matter of principle, then what happens next? You run the risk, perhaps, of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's probably worth it, because if 70% of people who criticise Israel go quiet when they're called anti-Semitic, 20% gird their loins and carry on, and 10% actually allow their views of all Jewish people, or all Israeli people, or both, to be coloured so slightly by the tone of the abuse that they are receiving. Go on. Give us a call. Jason's in Peterborough. We were talking to him before. He's not phoning in specifically for that point, but it was a terrible line. So back to where we were, Jason. What would you like to say?
Jolly good. Hopefully this is better. No, my view is that Jeremy Corbyn is simply, in the old traditional way, is a communist.
Yeah.
It's his views, and you said before, his views haven't changed in 40 years, and you're right, they haven't changed in 40 years. And I think if you are a typical communist-style leaning politician, then you don't see a particular religion, race, colour, etc. You simply see the injustices that you believe that are there. I'm not defending Jeremy Corbyn, by the way, because I think the man's a complete fool.
Okay.
But I think that, to me, in my view, puts why we see the anti-Semitic wing of the current Labour Party's policies coming up, and we kind of generalise and use Corbyn in the way that perhaps a traditional socialist, Western socialist party would operate.
Yes.
He's not a Western socialist at all. He is a typical communist.
Well, I don't know that he is a communist. I haven't read anything that suggests he wants to take the means of production up and down the country. I know he talks about renationalisation, but
absolutely, that's not a start to a communist regime.
No, mate, not unless the NHS is communist.
No. But then,
or the welfare state.
Well, no, you have to take all of that out from that. But if you start to say,
what do you mean you have to take all of that out from that? Let's not fall out. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is a communist. All right, and you're perfectly entitled to think that he is. But the argument that he can't be anti-Semitic because he's a communist, isn't that just a rock and a hard place?
No. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn sees the anti-Semitic part of it at all.
He just sees the oppressive masters, overlords, whoever they may be.
He perceives.
Yeah.
Because
okay.
of his politics.
Yeah.
That's where I think.
Well, I don't think he's a communist, because I believe that a small coterie of incredibly powerful, unaccountable, wealthy people are accruing. They always do throughout history. We've had a little hiatus after the Second World War, and now we're returning to 19th century values of mill owners and master sweeps. I believe that, but I'm not a communist. But I never add the word Jewish to the mill owners and master sweeps paradigm.
No, absolutely. And neither would I. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree that there are some remarkably powerful people who are way above any
communist.
Any perhaps. Well,
stop being such a communist.
Listen, at the end of the day, I look at Jeremy Corbyn and would challenge around the Salisbury thing and say, why does he not come out and simply, if every other Western government, or not every other, but the majority of Western governments coming out and pretty much saying the evidence that we've seen
with Russia.
By the British.
Well, no, mate, you can't. No, you really are going to fall apart now if you're trying to claim Vladimir Putin represents anything that remotely resembles communism. Vladimir Putin is the apotheosis of toxic capitalism.
Which potentially is why Corbyn does not criticise, because I don't think Corbyn can see the difference. That is the problem with him. I think he is such an idealistic communist.
He still sees the Soviet. He doesn't see the kleptocrat. I don't know. I mean, this is part of the problem with Corbyn not exposing himself to proper scrutiny or proper interview, in that it leaves the rest of us with little choice but to speculate about what makes the man tick. For the record, there's an empty chair in this studio every day for 3 hours. He's welcome to occupy it whenever he wants. Seriously, maybe not mystery hour. I don't want to start an armed revolution on the streets, although that's probably his cup of tea. Dina is in Hendon. Dina, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I know that you didn't want to go down the Israel route. But
well, let's not then.
But you started, you brought it up.
No, I didn't. You invaded Poland. Go on.
I actually don't think we did.
I'm quoting Basil Fawlty, as I'm sure everybody realises.
I know that.
Go on.
No, I just feel, look, I was a student in the early 80s, and I remember the likes of Ken Livingstone, Jeremy Corbyn coming, speaking to the student body. Their obsession at that time against Israel was pathological. I mean, that, I think, is the issue here. I think the issue is about Israel. I don't think he thinks himself as anti-Semitic. He is definitely an anti-Zionist. Now, whether you want to equate the two...
You think he's opposed to the existence of the State of Israel, or he's opposed to some of the things that... I don't think you can find any evidence for that. And this is, in many ways, unintentionally, this is precisely what I've just been describing. So if I say, I don't think they should have bombed that hospital, you say, oh, that means you don't think Israel should exist. And that's a horribly...
No, it has to be... No. It has to be put in context.
Well, give me some context where Jeremy Corbyn has spoken out against the existence of Israel.
Well, he's actually he's aligned himself with people that want to destroy the state of Israel. So if he calls his friends, the Hezbollah, his friends.
Gandhi called Hitler his friend.
He has referred to them, and he does associate.
Yes, Gandhi called Hitler his friend. Are you suggesting that Gandhi sympathised with Hitler's ambitions?
I'm not quite sure because I don't know the history.
Well, I take it from me. Gandhi and Hitler were on very different sides of history, but Gandhi called him a friend in the hope of opening up negotiations and persuading him to be less vicious and vile than he was behaving at the time. The letter is on the public record. So Jeremy Corbyn, of course, calling Hamas and Hezbollah friends is problematical, but it's not evidence that he believes Israel shouldn't exist. It's also a little bit fascistic to suggest that we shouldn't consort or speak with people we disagree with or people whose minds we're seeking to change. And in the context of seeking to change their minds, greeting them as friend, like Gandhi did to Hitler, seems to me perfectly reasonable. You can't demonstrate to me that Corbyn thinks Israel shouldn't exist.
Well, it's in his mind, I feel, and what I remember from years ago, he has a very pathological problem with the state of Israel.
With what it does, though. You're doing the thing. No, with what it does, not with what it is.
But why does he not stand up and do any criticism of any other state that is causing problems around the world?
One thing you can't say about Jeremy
Corbyn. Syria. Where's his criticism of Assad?
Well, I don't know, but what's that got to do with his position on Israel?
No, but
do I have to criticise, if I want to criticise you, do I have to criticise every woman in Hendon?
No, but it doesn't make sense.
So why can't I just criticise you? Why do you get to choose who I can and can't criticise? I want to criticise you. Do I have to criticise every Dina in Hendon, every woman in Hendon, every person in Hendon?
And there's no problem with the criticism. Israelis themselves criticise politically.
I'm not talking about Israel. I'm talking about you. And I'm talking about why you get to decide who I can criticise. Jeremy Corbyn can criticise whoever he wants. And if you think that he criticises Israel more than he criticises other countries, then the argument that Israel is somehow a Western democracy in the middle of the Middle East would surely mean that it's more susceptible to criticism than a totalitarian state or an autocracy.
But it's how it's criticised. It's how it's criticised. The language that's used in the left.
Yes, I'm not arguing with that. I'm just arguing with your claim that he doesn't think Israel has a right to exist. I think that's pretty close to libel.
Well, I just feel from the things that he's...
You're telling me about your feelings now, not Jeremy Corbyn's proven convictions.
My feelings. I can't tell you about somebody else's.
No, but you can tell me about somebody's recorded statements.
Well, I know that the statements that were made many, many years ago were very inflammatory and very derogatory, and they were...
Which ones?
I can't even go back to how... I can't even remember. I'm sorry, I'm not so articulate.
No, that's all right. I just think if you accused me, because I have criticised Israeli policies in the past, if you accused me of being anti-Semitic, I'd be used to it. I'd think it was horribly wrong and possibly cynical and deliberate. But if you accused me of not wanting Israel to exist because I said I wish they hadn't dropped those bombs that time, it'd be pretty gross, Dina, wouldn't it?
Well, all I remember is a lot of times that you've criticised, it's been based on misinformation.
Oh, crikey! I didn't know we were opening that door.
Oh yes.
Okay, but have you ever listened to me on the radio and thought there's a man that doesn't think Israel has a right to exist? Tell the truth.
I've never thought that, but I have thought that you have been extremely unfair and also had a lot of sort of fake news being passed your way.
Anti-Semitic, maybe?
Well, not anti-Semitic, yes, no, I wouldn't say anti-Semitic.
And now I ask you for examples and you apologise that you can't think of any.
Well, I remember when you commented, I think when there was an invasion, at that time there was an attack in Jenin and you made some statements before any kind of public...
what did I say?
Well, you were saying about the lion has roared and it's time to quieten the lion.
What are you talking about?
Yes, well, if you go back to some kind of statements that you made, I think it was about the flotilla at the time, or only when the news came out without any proper investigation of what happened.
Okay, I shall examine the archive, Dina. I thought we were being light-hearted and humorous when I used myself as an example of someone being unfairly maligned as anti-Semitic, but I, of course, should have recognised that was a little bit ambitious and optimistic. It's 11-7, although I suppose quod erat demonstrandum. The former Cabinet Minister Ed Davey, Liberal Democrat member for Kingston, has sought an urgent question to MPs over claims that data was used during the Brexit campaign to bombard individuals with propaganda. We'll catch up with Ed Davey shortly. We're also going to speak to Lord Patten, who is on the stump today on behalf of Open Britain, talking chiefly about the Irish border and telling uncomfortable truths. This is the problem. If you were kind enough to compliment my article in the New Statesman this week, you'll know that this, for me, is becoming a really urgent issue. You get on Chris Patten to, if this was the BBC, you'd get Chris Patten on to simply state some facts, and then you'd have to invite Jacob Rees-Mogg on to tell you when the unicorns arrive. That is now what the BBC mistakes for balance. You can see why we've done it commercially. It's kind of comforting fibs. Historically, a fantastic business, uncomfortable truths. This is the real holy grail of commercial radio, is building a big audience while telling uncomfortable truths as opposed to comforting fibs. But the BBC is now closer to where we are historically, so they bring on a guest to say, yeah, the Earth's flat, I believe, and they'll get just as much time and attention as the fellow on the other side with pictures taken in space showing that the Earth is round. 23 minutes after 11. Back to Jeremy Corbyn, anti-Semitism, and I wonder whether there is. I think there probably is. I think Dina maybe proved it without meaning to, that if you accuse somebody of anti-Semitism when they criticise Israel, then you create an environment in which criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism become conflated. And once anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel are conflated, then critics of Israel move into areas of anti-Semitism. You've got to get up early to avoid these sort of tides, these shifts. I don't know, it's just a thought. 23 after 11. Sam is in Medina in Israel. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. I think that I've got a lot to say even, but I don't know really where to start. I think just a couple of points on Jeremy Corbyn and this storm over anti-Semitism. Based from where I am, in the Middle East, and I'm seeing it from here, yes. I think there's two issues there. I think, first of all, it's the fact that the Labour Party is fairly steeped in socialism, and whether it's Soviet communism or Nazi national socialism. No. There's nothing socialist about the Nazis, mate, any more than the Democratic Republic of Korea is democratic. Yeah. National socialism is a socialist movement. No, it's not. With a veneer of nationalism. Okay, well, yes, it is. And okay. That's why the Nazi flag is red. It copies the same colour of the Soviet communism. Please, don't confuse the issue too much. National socialism is definitely steeped within the socialist movement. Okay, there are strong groups. So you think Nazism was left wing? I think there's a strong argument to say that Nazism has elements of left-wingism in it. It's true. It's a fascist movement. Fascist movements are also very similar in structure to communist movements. I can see why you said you weren't quite sure where you were going to start. I wish you'd started somewhere else, because now you sound bonkers. Yeah, maybe. Well, let me just make a couple of points. I don't think I'm going to. I think, for me, describing Nazism as left-wing is pretty much a red card. Well, it shouldn't be. I think you should be open to hearing that. Well, I mean, how do you feel about the Earth being flat? If you provide strong evidence that it's flat, then maybe I'll accept it. Okay, well, you provide me some evidence that Nazism is left wing, then. I already did. No, you didn't. You told me what colour the flag was, mate. Yeah, National Socialism. We've got red in the Union flag. Does that mean we're communists or Nazis or what was it again? Probably not. But socialist. If you look at National Socialism, simply the name... I'll tell you what, Sam, send me an email. It's 25 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to events rather closer to home. Sir Ed Davey is the Liberal Democrat MP for Kingston and Surbiton, who is responsible, really, for the urgent questions that are being asked in the House of Commons later today with regard to some of this data that has been unearthed by investigations into Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, allegedly being used to bombard people with propaganda, which often was fake news, but which, of course, was both believed by the recipients and which many contend may have influenced their votes. Have I précised your position accurately, Ed Davey?
Well, you have, but the Liberal Democrats are actually asking for an urgent question. I have won an emergency debate in Parliament today, primarily about the allegations that the Vote Leave and the Be Leave campaign in the European referendum were acting together in a conspiracy, which means that they not only did not report that to the Electoral Commission, but their combined expenditure would have broken the legal limits, and therefore a criminal act would have happened.
I've got my emergency debates and my urgent questions mixed up, haven't I? So you are... that's quite all right. The last fellow had Nazis mixed up with socialists. There's a lot of it about. There must be something in the water. So to be clear, this is the Observer, the Channel 4 News revelations regarding huge sums of money, in excess of £600,000, sort of ending up in curious places, and the claim that there was no collusion between any of these organisations, despite the fact that we've seen them deleting their Google Drives and being photographed together.
Yeah, the evidence is mounting, and basically people should not be cheated. We should not allow democracy to be bought. And if we're going to have faith in the democratic processes, the rules of any election or referendum need to be upheld. That's why the Liberal Democrats have asked this emergency debate and won it, while we've written to the police, the National Police Chiefs Council, we've written to the Electoral Commission, and I've written to Yvette Cooper, the Home Affairs Select Committee chair, to ask her to set an inquiry. We need to get to the bottom of this. This could not be more serious allegations, and they go right to the top. You know, Boris Johnson was the head of Vote Leave organisation, and surely he must bear some responsibility if it turns out that these allegations are true.
It's interesting that the Liberal Democrats are at the forefront of this, because oddly, some other senior cabinet ministers put a little bit of clear blue water between themselves and Boris Johnson at the weekend when they agreed that the Electoral Commission should have a look into some of these allegations, while Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who was also part of the organisation that is in the spotlight, were trying to claim that there's nothing to see here.
Well, I'm not sure it's odd that Liberal Democrats are...
Well, not odd. I just mean unhelpful. It would be more helpful if it were a pro-Brexit position calling for the investigation, because you leave yourself open, unfairly in my view, to the accusation that you're just bemoaning and you're doing anything you can to overturn the result of the referendum.
Well, we're wanting to make sure that any democratic process in Britain is fair and abides by the rules. People should not be cheated, I repeat. Now, I hope that we will get people from the Leave side of this argument to back us. Already, certainly in social media, I've seen people who said, I voted Leave, but it would be completely un-British to have a election referendum vote that was bought, that people who had huge amounts of money bought a democratic process, including having contracts where people's data and people's privacy look like they've been abused. I mean, there's a combination of things wrong with the vote, or the allegations are that a combination of things that were wrong with this vote.
How optimistic are you?
Well, I think the case for an inquiry, indeed a full-scale public inquiry, is so strong. I think it's unanswerable. If the allegations then prove to be correct, then we need to hold the relevant people to account. And the case that Liberal Democrats have been making for a vote on the deal, that case becomes overwhelming. Because if the actual vote itself is brought into question, then the logic is that when we have the deal, that the British people should be given the chance to vote on that deal.
I know you...
But I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
Yes.
Let's set up the inquiry. Let's look at these allegations because they are so serious.
David, I know your time is at a premium. I'm probably even more exposed to the lunatic fringe of Brexit than you are. So let me give you fair warning that you can start the countdown now to people claiming they knew that there had been financial irregularities in the campaign, and they definitively and definitely voted for that campaign because of the financial irregularities. It's only a matter of time.